Hello there and welcome to another Rusty Compass unreliable travel guide to the coronavirus. Today I'm in another port town. This little series began last week in Fremantle, Western Australia, and I made the point back then that port cities have been places of transmission of disease for centuries. Okay. The good news is that Hoi An's days as a hub of the transmission of nasty viruses ended centuries ago. And Vietnam has been especially effective in containing community spread of the coronavirus as well. So good that it has no special alerts from the WHO or the American CDC or the Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the British Home Office. Former Port Town, which is a World Heritage listed tourist site, is actually one of Vietnam's most popular tourism destinations, and it is remarkably buoyant. Given the news that's been flying around the world this week, things are feeling very buoyant here in Hoi An still. The big tour groups from China and Korea are gone, but as you can see behind me, the amount of activity in the town is pretty similar actually to what it would have been 4 or 5 years ago. The sort of mass tourism, over tourism thing has pulled back a little, but Hoi An still feels very buoyant. Everybody in the world has heard about the deteriorating situation in Italy, Iran and Korea. What you probably haven't heard about is that things here in Vietnam have become significantly better. All 16 of Vietnam's reported cases of the coronavirus have been declared recovered and discharged, and Vietnam's situation looks far more optimistic than the news we're getting out of other countries. But this is a time of conflicting information, and I guess there's an inclination to focus on the bad news, so that's one of the reasons why I'm guessing there hasn't been much focus on Vietnam's more positive story. And I sense also that the Vietnamese government is cautious, rightly so, and avoiding triumphalism, because no doubt these situations can change very quickly. The fact that Vietnam and this region seem still to have avoided the worst outbreak scenarios that we've seen elsewhere has to raise a question that I'm still waiting for someone who knows more about these things to help us to understand. Someone from the WHO needs to give us some preliminary assessment to help us understand why all of the major community outbreaks of this illness, as far as I can see, are in countries that are experiencing winter, and why there have not yet been any reports of major community transmission of the coronavirus in Southeast Asia. It's not an expectation of a final position, it's an expectation of a preliminary assessment, because the absence of more specific information about these risks means that a country like Vietnam, where the risks really do seem to be very low, kind of finds itself in the same general basket because of its geography as countries like South Korea and China. It means that the panic over the virus is more damaging than the virus itself, and in a developing country like Vietnam, that comes at a very big human cost. Scientists must have a view on why all of these outbreaks so far have been in countries experiencing winter, and why countries that are always hot seem not to be experiencing community transmission. And even if their view is skepticism about the data, they should tell us that too. Lastly, as you run your little personal travel risk assessment, you might want to do some research on some wider risks that will help you to put the coronavirus risks in perspective. For example, you might want to run some analysis on the risk of staying at home. First of all, the prevalence of the coronavirus in your own country. Second of all, other risks in your own country. For example, how many people die in car accidents? How many people die in gun violence? How many people die in bicycle accidents? And then there's the real elephant in the room. Why is it that we might be panicking about this particular illness, which is definitely a serious concern, and not panicking and not taking any serious action about climate change? And I'm thinking of my own country. the land of toilet paper hoarders, Australia, but I'm also thinking of the United States and Canada, two other countries where the fossil fuel industry seems to have an outsized influence over our fossilised politicians. If you've been travelling in the developing world for a long time, you've already been buying into a world of risk when you travel. Now that's especially so if you were travelling in the developing world in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, before the internet became a thing, when travel really did involve exploration of remote places without a whole lot of connection to home. And when health, hygiene and safety standards in these countries were very poor. And of course, the way in which you travel also opens you up to a whole new range of risks. The question now is, to what extent should this change your consideration? And you've got two things to think about. The first is the disease itself, and the second is the potential of getting caught up in the whole panic and quarantining and so on. So there are a few things to think about there, and I don't want to make light of any of them. My intention is to try and put this stuff on the table and go from there. And the reason I call these unreliable travel guides is twofold. The first is because I'm not in a position to give you any definitive advice, and the second is because the situation is changing, so whatever I say today may or may not apply tomorrow. Hoi An feels blissful. It's perfect here right now. The weather is glorious, warm days, warm clear days, cooler nights. I've spent 5 days or so here cycling, walking, reading, eating, hanging out with friends, hanging out at the beach. It is a perfect time to be here. And of course, because of the coronavirus, there are some pretty crazy discounts out there as well. So some really good quality accommodation is available at incredible prices. So all the charm is still there, but the sort of hustle of the huge tour groups is gone.
Chị Mỹ, bánh mì, câu lạc.
You still can make sure that most of your spend is local. And that's one of the reasons why tourism, well, it's one of the reasons why the tragedy of the coronavirus, because tourism's the industry that it's hitting hardest at the moment. It's one of the reasons why it's so tragic, because it hurts so many small businesses. But it also means that when you travel during this time, you are able to, in your own small way, select, travel carefully, travel thoughtfully, and make sure that your money is making its way into communities. Anh đang làm gì đấy?
Vá lưới.
À, này á. This thing impacts everyone. And the worst of the impact is on the small guys, street sellers, fishermen, people like this lady. Cô ơi, có sợ corona không?
Không, Việt Nam không sợ.
Sao mà Việt Nam không sợ?
Vì ở đây là Hội An không có.
Hoi An không có.
Okay.
Tại vì có biển đẹp và có nắng và có một... I asked this lady selling chow, which is porridge on the beach, An Beach, just outside of Hoi An. I asked her whether she was scared of the coronavirus, and she told me in absolutely certain terms she was not, and that Hoi An was all clear. Whatever else you think about that claim, she captured beautifully the spirit of Vietnam. In my next unreliable travel guide to the coronavirus, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I did while I was in Hoi An. As I say, it was an outstanding refuge, and it's particularly gorgeous in Hoi An at the moment. And the deals in accommodation and airfares and so on make it a particularly perfect time to be there. Thanks very much, and we will talk more about Hoi An soon. Thank you.